Hi everyone, I'm Ravina.
And I'm Layla.
Welcome back to our channel, Nutrition Unpacked,
where we try diets so you don't have to.
We did the standard American diet for 10 days and it's been an interesting experience.
Definitely eye-opening.
In our first video on this topic, 2 videos ago, we talked about what the standard American diet is and its impacts on health. Last week, we talked all about the food industry and how it very intentionally manipulates the food market to really drive overconsumption. Today, we're gonna go even deeper and further than that and talk about the environmental variables that might be affecting what we eat and how that might be contributing to obesity.
Standard American diet, most people know, typically not associated with good health outcomes, but nevertheless, we are seeing it proliferate, not just in the United States, but also across the globe. So what is it about this diet that is so...
What's it called when it's like intrusive?
Intrusive, exactly. These foods are very, very palatable. These foods aren't very satiating, but there's a lot more to it than that. For a very long time, when we talked about the issue of obesity and a lot of the things that drive chronic disease, it was very, very individual focused. It was like,
people who are overweight, they're lazy, they don't want to do anything, they eat too much.
And that was kind of the full story. But that paradigm and that thought process, as we've come to learn more and more about it, is just completely untrue and also unhelpful, because when we look at the prevalence of these kind of diseases, a majority of people have some kind of diet-related chronic disease, if we include like obesity, overweight, hypertension, diabetes, things like that. So unless the majority of people are just lazy and eat too much and have no self-control. Yeah.
It's a flawed paradigm.
Yes.
I think this is very beautifully captured in what's called the foresight map of obesity. It depicts how there's so many categories and variables that actually play into the obesity epidemic. There's psychological variables, physiological, environmental, economic, political, sociological. Even just hearing those words, you can kind of see how there's very few parts of that are actually within our direct control. And I know,
Do we really have free will?
I think it's one of the biggest philosophical questions out there. And I think based on what we're seeing in psychology and neurobiology,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Today we're going to talk about some of those other variables that might be driving the consumption patterns and maybe the impact on weight.
Just to review a little bit, the standard American diet, what that consists of, what we've been doing for the past little while. This is a diet that's characterized as a high intake of ultra-processed foods, convenience foods, eating out quite frequently, lots of energy intake coming in from beverages, and then also a lack of fruits and vegetables.
There's 2 things that are contributing to this shift, and there's a bi-directional relationship and they're both mutually affecting each other. First of all, we're just seeing a higher demand for convenience foods. And then what we're also seeing is that the food industry is very, very motivated by profit.
These are 2 elements. Really, we could make a 100 video series about all the different things that contribute, but these were 2 things that really stuck out to us. The first thing that was very apparent to the both of us doing the standard American diet was it was super convenient.
I will say, it took less time than it normally takes me to assemble a lunch that I had previously made. So I have a little race screen on my sleeve here.
Absolutely love how this took 0 effort. I'm actually kind of concerned that this week is going to make me very lazy moving forward, because this has been absolute bliss.
You didn't really have to think about what you were eating and planning.
I have to say, this has kind of been a fun week because I have had so much extra time. I've probably gained in total an extra 2 to 3 hours this week so far from not having to prep food at all. Not that I've really done anything productive with that extra time.
All the labor that goes into making food, it's very much reduced.
I made my little hamburger helper. When I tell you this is the easiest thing I've ever made in my entire life, I get it. Honestly, I really get it, because literally you just put the meat in, then it takes 2 seconds, no mental work, and you have a full little meal here.
And that's just, in a 2-adult household. I imagine if I had kids and stuff and you had to make multiple lunches and
one kid hates vegetables and one kid hates meat and this person only wants bread.
If you had to deal with all of those variables, seeking those foods that are the quickest to prepare, especially if you're having to make multiple dishes for multiple meals a day, oh my gosh, it makes total sense that there's such a demand for these convenience foods.
Yeah, and it really is a privilege to have the resources to be able to buy fresh foods, the time resources to be able to prioritize not just like the cooking, but the planning to make meals happen. Not everyone has that privilege, and oftentimes it's kind of a trade-off that you'd have to make. I know even for myself, prioritizing eating healthy and like eating the kind of meals that I like to eat is kind of sometimes comes at a trade-off with other things I want to do. And if you have kids, as you mentioned, or you have a very, very demanding job, or you have to work 2 jobs, like it almost just seems impossible.
I like batch prepping my foods, but even like assembling foods with things that I've prepared actually still takes more time than just popping something in the microwave or pouring something out of a can.
That's the craziest thing to me.
The fact that food preparation takes time, that variable in and of itself has probably been relatively stable throughout history. So what is the variable that's changed? Time poverty. Cost of living has gone up in recent decades. We're no longer really at a point where I think most people can have just one adult in the household bringing in an income. When you have kind of all the adults in the household having to work possibly outside the home for a significant part of the week, that drastically reduces the amount of time that's even available to do all of that work.
This is very consistent with what we see from the data. People who have a higher perceived lack of time, we see that they have a higher reliance on things like ultra processed foods, additionally going out to eat more. Right now, cost of living has increased, and this has meant that for a lot of households, basically every adult in the household has to have a full-time job. When we look in places like Norway, we look at the number of hours worked per week, we do actually see a higher reliance on ultra processed foods. Similar kind of research was done in the United States and didn't find that correlation. But I think some of like the thought process behind it there was that in Norway, things are like a lot more expensive. So eating out is a little bit more prohibitive and people tend to only do it on special occasions. Whereas in the States, kind of like value meals and all these different things. So they might be actually going to eat out more, but the food might not be, quote, like ultra processed.
Part of the challenge too is when you're talking about making food at home, it's not just the time that it takes to physically stand in the kitchen and like cut things and cook things. There's so much that goes into even planning. There's a mental labor component of it. Did not plan out my lunch very well. Starting off the standard American diet strong with a PB&J sandwich. Historically, even cross-culturally, that labor has fallen. Typically, if there is a woman in the household, the woman is kind of forced to bear that responsibility. Now, since, like we said, all the adults in the household are generally having to work outside the home, there isn't necessarily anyone else necessarily there to pick up that role.
A lot of the research that's been done has like primarily like only focused on women's experiences, and I think it might be because women are the ones who are like supposed to be cooking and managing the household, but also might be potentially because in households where there's like a heterosexual couple, the burden does mostly fall on the woman and isn't absorbed by the other members of the household as much.
The other thing that might be contributing to our increased reliance on convenience foods is actually a reduction in food skills. And this is an interesting thing because there might be a bi-directional relationship there. But we do find that, you know, as the generations and decades progress, food skills do seem to be slowly in decline.
It is apparent to me that a lot of people don't have them because they just never pick them up at home. We don't learn them at school.
That opportunity for exposure and learning, that exposure is just going down over time. But I think the chicken and the egg story is like, is it that our diminishing food skills are making us rely on convenience foods more, or is just the availability and reliance on the convenience foods not allowing us or giving us the opportunity to nurture our food skills?
As problematic as it was, home economics, in my opinion, important course, and I think restoring that and putting some of this learning back into school will mean that people who don't necessarily have access to learning these skills at home will learn it in school.
Now, let's talk about the devil on all of our shoulders.
Yeah, this part is like seems very sinister to me. There's like some forces at play that are like controlling us all. Like we have no free will.
I think most people are aware of the role of like industry as a whole, even outside of the food context, or industry and corporations, how much they're influencing our world economically, politically, and shaping our culture and society as well. I think we're all slowly maybe becoming more and more aware, but being aware of it doesn't really free us from the impact or the consequences. The key driver, I guess, is food industry is very much driven by their desire to increase their profits. And I mean, fair enough, that's what they're hired to do, that's what their jobs are, great, but it does come at a significant cost to the consumers.
And it creates this conflict between doing right by your shareholders and doing right by, I would say, like, society. And
all the millions of other people.
And I would actually say that's a huge driver of this problem. These companies really want to increase their market share, increase their profits, and so they try and differentiate themselves in many different ways. A lot of times, companies in pursuit of increasing their market shares actually kind of shape our culture. And two ways that we actually see that is through the increase in portion size that we've seen over the past few decades, and also through the proliferation of snacking. Apparently, the amount of calories we get from snacks every day has been increasing quite a bit.
I think generations ago, from what I understand, it was just you had your 3 square meals and that was kind of it. Maybe like an afternoon tea or something like that. But now I feel like the idea of like snack foods, having your afternoon snack, your post-dinner snack, I think it's just part of our society now. It's kind of what's expected. You're gonna have more eating opportunities than just the 3 main meals. And what this means is that the food industry is no longer limited to just 3 meals to sell you things. The other major thing, which I think we can especially see in the US and North America as a whole, is just a drastic increase in portion sizes. I think on the surface, the idea of, increasing portion sizes, like, wouldn't that actually hurt their profit margin? But we actually find that to not be the case because the cost of a lot of the raw materials is actually quite low. And if you can get more people to buy your things at a higher price, even if it's a larger portion size, that does end up benefiting the companies. One of the ways that it benefits them is, when it's larger portion sizes, that means it's bigger packaging. So even just visually, in terms of like when you're walking through a store, you're just more likely to see it and therefore more likely to buy it.
Also, it's like value. You're like, oh, I'm getting more, so I'm gonna go frequent this brand more because I'm always getting more. Some of the research that's looked at this has shown that not only have we increased portion sizes in like our packaged foods or our restaurant foods, we've also seen a concurrent increase in portion sizes at home. Basically, we've become accustomed to having these large portion sizes outside of the home that when we start preparing meals inside the home, like that's the new norm. What's happening in industry really can shape our cultural norms and our behaviors.
Part of it too, and this might be kind of separate from this conversation, but I think a lot of us are taught to kind of finish whatever is in front of us. Like from childhood, we're very explicitly taught, like, you can't leave the table until you finish your plate. And then now you go to a restaurant or something and, the same plate is being served to like an 8-year-old little girl or a 35-year-old male bodybuilder, and it's like, finish your plate.
Yeah, and then once you get accustomed to like seeing a plate that full or seeing a plate of that size, you're gonna go home and do the same thing. And again, no one's leaving the table until they finish their plate. And obviously food waste is like bad, we don't want it, but
just being aware that there's other consequences to that as well. We cannot underestimate the impact of food marketing. The way that we see different foods and beverages being marketed completely shapes our desire for it, our views of it, and our intentions to purchase and consume different things.
Like when I think of marketing, I kind of think of it of like people using psychology for like the
Yes.
bad side. Like,
Absolutely. It is fascinating. And I am convinced that the only reason that beer is one of the most consumed alcoholic beverages is because of marketing. Because you cannot convince me that anyone would have beer willingly if they weren't told that it's manly and cool.
I agree with that because, okay, if it was like having like a fruity, yummy, delicious drink or a beer, I don't know why anyone would choose beer. But
because you need to be a man.
That's
I'm
completely
gonna die on that hill.
You're dying on that hill.
Yeah.
That is conjecture. I don't know if I saw that.
That's not to say that like it doesn't work. Like I think part of psychology is like that it works.
Yeah.
So they could actually like it. But I'm saying that if they weren't exposed to any of the marketing and they just had it, would they ever go back for a second sip?
I wouldn't. I don't.
Exactly.
So, I'm immune to the marketing. Marketing is not just like commercials or magazine advertisement. There's also sponsorships and different kind of campaigns. And like in movies, they'll have product placement. And a lot of it's like subconscious almost. Like they're trying to subconsciously get you interested in their products. And like, I feel like talking about this, I feel like I'm like spreading some kind of conspiracy theory, but like,
but
this
it's
is
like
like
literally true.
Yeah. You have a lot of kids who are exposed to this. Also, when you're so busy and being bombarded with marketing all the time, sometimes it's just like easy to just like pick the thing that you've probably been shown subconsciously like 200 times.
I think everything that we were saying about kind of food industry's motives, I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone. And, it makes sense that they are driven by profit and they're going to do the tactics that work to make sure that they achieve that end. What might be surprising or maybe not as intuitive is like not only are they doing kind of modifying their foods and doing aggressive marketing to drive food intake, they're actually also very intentionally, in some cases, stifling public health initiatives that might be helpful in supporting the health of the public.
We've seen things with marketing to children. There was a big focus on reducing the marketing to children because it's been found that in children's brains, they don't perceive marketing the same way and can't really differentiate between advertising and like real media content. That can unduly influence them to make certain choices and maybe even put pressure on their parents to make certain choices. And there has been a strong backlash from food industry because they make a lot of money from kids. We did talk about how obesity is a very complex problem. The quality of diets is a really complex problem. How do we address this? It's really complicated. And a lot of times actually industry likes to benefit from that and be like, what? Like us? I don't think it's us.
I don't think I'm the problem.
Well, have you considered it might be that everyone's just like lazy and isn't exercising? Because like that would really help us out. If Coca-Cola and their drive to try and make it seem as though the issue for public health and obesity really lies with physical activity and focusing on physical activity, kind of to like push
take the spotlight off of them. For example, there were international congresses on physical activity and public health, and there has been documented email exchanges between representatives from Coke and various public health leaders. Coke was very much trying to create these relationships with these public health leaders to try to manipulate some of the messaging that was being put out by the public health leaders. So given the reality of all of this, what can we do as individuals? Given that, this is the environment that we're in, we're bombarded with visual cues and all sorts of subconscious messaging that's driving our food intake and our food choices that may not be serving our health. One of the things that we can maybe do is taking advantage of the mandated nutrition labels. While, I don't think this is necessarily going to be easy or accessible for everyone, it can be helpful to look at the back of packages to get a sense of what ingredients are in that product, how many calories, how much protein, fiber, and whatever nutrient of concern you're kind of looking for, and using that to try to make more informed choices.
Another thing is practicing mindful eating. As we spoke about, we've kind of been manipulated into thinking that larger portion sizes are just kind of the norm. Mindful eating really allows us to kind of like connect with our body while we're eating and think about like, oh, am I actually full right now? Should I continue eating? Should I have more? Am I happy to stop? And I think that this is something that's
a lost art at this point, right? I think most of us we're either watching something on TV, we're on our phone, we're doing work, we might be driving even. What inherently happens is that we end up listening more to the extrinsic cues, which could be whatever it just happens to be in front of you, rather than our intrinsic hunger and fullness cues. The next thing that you could do is, if possible, try to get your family more involved in the food preparation process. As I even say those words, I know that may not be feasible or possible every single day or every single weekend, or it may not be an appropriate path for everyone. But if possible, and it might just be only possible during the Christmas holidays when everyone happens to be home, or during summer vacation when there's a little bit more flexibility with time and extracurricular activities. But if there are windows of opportunity to get the whole family involved in deciding what to eat, maybe even going to the grocery store, totally get it may not be realistic for everyone, but if there are opportunities to make it more of a family involved process, that might help with some of the food skills later on in life and may reduce people's reliance on those convenience foods.
While we're talking about family, it just shows how important, social connections are when we're making decisions. So seeking social support from friends, maybe extended family members, neighbors that have similar health goals can be really, really helpful when you're trying to come up with ideas or maybe just need some extra support.
Final thing that we want to talk about is also just advocating for policies and other things that could be helpful in supporting change on a larger scale. Sadly, there's unfortunately very little that's actually within our control, but if there is an opportunity, if there are policies kind of on the table, or if there are conversations about policy changes or changes to the education system, or how foods are prepared, or how packaged foods are labeled, or how marketing is done, trying to advocate for those causes that could help foster a more healthy society could be a way to take a more upstream approach.
I think that, you know, nutrition is like never like the top of like what a politician is talking about for how they're going to make everything better when they're elected compared to the last guy. But I'm a little biased. I think nutrition is really important. I don't know, I am biased, but I do think it is very, very important. Hopefully, with time, people will show that this is something that's important to them. So politicians will prioritize nutrition and making sure that, you know, our next generations and our current generations are well nourished so that we can avoid some of these chronic diseases.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a video, and follow us on Instagram